Welcome to the Heart of the Moment, where we explore the big questions, bold ideas, and the connections that shape our world. Today, as we celebrate the legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., we're diving into one of his most enduring visions, the beloved community, a place where justice, equality, and love guide how we live together. But let's be honest, in today's divisive climate, King's dreams feel both urgent and fragile. With polarization at an all time high, the question we have to ask is this: is an inclusive, beloved community still desirable? Do we want a world where there's a space for everyone? Or have we become too comfortable with division, with drawing lines and choosing sides? Joining me to help navigate these questions are two distinguished guests. First, the Reverend McClain, the senior pastor of Riverside Baptist Church in Washington, D.C., where she is the first African American and first woman to serve in this role in the church's 165-year history. Reverend McClain is passionate about exploring creative ways to encounter the divine and facilitating justice initiatives within faith communities. And then there's Reverend Dr. Timothy Adkins-Jones, the senior pastor of the Bethany Baptist Church in Newark, New Jersey, and an assistant professor of homiletics at Union Theological Seminary in the city of New York. Dr. Adkins-Jones embodies the Black preacher scholar tradition, focusing on practical theology and empowering Black communities through transformative leadership. Please join me in welcoming them to the show. So, welcome to the show.
Hello.
Hey, good to be here.
Thank y'all for joining me. I just want to dive right on in and let our audience know that I know both of you very well. You are dynamic pastors and preachers, because there's a difference, and great human beings. And so I'm just happy to have you here on this MLK weekend of observance to discuss the beloved community.
Thanks for having us.
Absolutely. Thank you.
So Dr. King says this: the end is reconciliation. The end is redemption. The end is the creation of the beloved community. It is this type of spirit and this type of love that can transform opposers into friends. It is this type of understanding goodwill that will help transform the deep gloom of the old age into the exuberant gladness of the new age. It is this love which will bring about miracles in the hearts of men. Our goal is to create a beloved community, and this will require a qualitative change in our souls as well as a qualitative change in our lives. Mm-hmm. Now, Dr. King's vision of the beloved community often feels aspirational, if I'm being very honest. So how would you define this concept? And I'll start with Pastor Mill. How would you define this concept in practical terms today? And what does it require from individuals of the community to make it a reality?
Yeah. So I think the beloved community is always happening. It's always shaping itself, and it's never going to be finished. So in a way, I disagree with Dr. King in that the end, it's an end goal. I don't think there is an end to it. I think it happens in these very small ways, in these very small pockets. And it is not so much a macro event. It's micro events happening in the corners of a community that you will never know about because it's not on social media or because it doesn't have a big platform, right? So I think the beloved community is always a community that is shaping itself around a belief that it is bigger than us, the individual us, so bigger than me, right? So that whatever my belief is, and if I have a faith belief or some other kind of belief, that the idea is that nothing is just about me and Michelle McClain. It's always serving a greater purpose, that is to serve others in community. That's how we build, that's how we share. And I think that actually happens best in micro ways. So these micro beloved communities are actually in existence, even though we're not seeing some sort of macro thing happening in our country, at least. And I don't know if we will see it in our lifetime. So that's what I'll say there.
All right, Pastor AJ.
I definitely think that Pastor Me is on to something that when I think of beloved community, I think of what Jesus talks about the kingdom being in Luke 17, the idea that the kingdom is within us. But that word translates among us, right within our reach. And so I absolutely agree with the idea that community, beloved community, is there, and it's in some ways it's on us to notice it, to elevate it, to help show how it's being revealed, and then to speak those micro victories, as it were, into practice. It is not something, but I think the difficulty is that it is not as tangible as we might want it to be. And as such, it becomes difficult for people to see it, to reach for it, or even to think that we're making progress. So on the one level, we're not noticing it as it is, but we're also not noticing as it advances or becomes a more realized event, especially because we think of King so particularly in a time of very real and tangible change. I think the other thing that in 2025 that's so difficult to think about this idea of beloved community is that while there are, please don't get me wrong, there are so many laws that are necessary, there's so many policies that we need to change. The kind of monumental shift that we saw in and around the civil rights movement is not necessarily the kind of movements that we want to see now. And so we don't know as well what to point to on the other end of a march or a rally to say that there was victory. We're not raising awareness in the same kind of ways. And so to that point, the end has even changed in how we would notice the beloved community in the first place. And so I think that makes it more difficult for people to get on board with the idea, it just as a concept to begin with.
I think that you bring up something very important that I would have loved to have been on a panel or somewhere to say, hey, do you miss this? The Bayard Rustin movie. I thoroughly was excited that we were finally going to get a Rustin movie. And when we got to the end and it was focused on King, and I know that there's a very, very like important part that he comes to the podium at the end and lists our demands and how Hollywood just erase that whole part. And so I'm thinking, well, because we are people who don't know our history, and history is often just tied to, oh, well, we were slaves and that sort of thing, that when people see the civil rights movement, they think, oh, that's more of that, like, oh, we're down and out, we're subservient to people, that we missed that there was strategy, there was protest. And then at the protest, he is saying, this is why we're protesting. This is why we're representing today. And I think that we're missing that in our communities, just in terms of people not knowing what to do. In your congregations, how do you reconcile maybe the people coming to you saying, like, I don't know what to do?
Well, I will start here just to reflect on something you just said. What I have witnessed in a lot of the movement building around free Palestine and supporting Palestine, I have witnessed a lot of organizers actually following those methods of the civil rights movement and listing demands. So when we gathered in July on the corner of Pennsylvania Avenue and Constitution Avenue, the demand was to keep Netanyahu from speaking in front of Congress, right? So whether we won or not, whatever, but they had demands, right? So there are people who are still following that, and so it's out there. It may not be the most popular group of people, but it's out there. I would say we have to attend to local needs. I don't want to say first. Let me backtrack. Obery Hendricks, in his book Politics of Jesus, talks about treating the people's needs as holy. So whenever somebody comes to me and saying, well, what can I do? There's just so many problems and I don't know how to attack everything. Well, what is a need that you see in this community, in this neighborhood? How can you treat that one need as holy? That is the beginning step to doing this work that will hopefully create beloved communities around the world.
Absolutely. I mean, I also think it's important to acknowledge the depth of the issues, right? So when people come saying, I don't know what to do, I find myself free enough to say, me neither. I mean, you know, when we're talking these big earth-shattering global issues, I don't know how to address those things either, except as Pastor Mia just said, sort of to address the smaller things as it builds up to it. But I also think pastorally, the job is to really help with the existential angst that is created in the pain and the grief. I was so overcome by how people were viscerally experiencing this past election in ways that seemed new in a lot of ways. It's not as if Black congregations have not, engaged in partisan political work before or been wholly behind certain candidates. I mean, remember back when President Obama was running, for example. I mean, the idea that we would throw ourselves behind a candidate and put real stakes in it is not new. But for me, how people were experiencing this past election was a new kind of depth of pain, angst, anxiety, such that when it didn't go the way that people wanted it to go, on the back end, all of that pain, all of that anger, all of that frustration and fear rose up in very destabilizing ways. And so I found a lot of the pastoral work then to talk about theodicy, to talk about what God's sovereignty means. What does it mean that God is on the throne when this happens, and to really wrestle with these real deep issues so that folk can be well, even as they're trying to make the world well.
Yeah.
I'm gonna bring up something you said, Pastor AJ. You were talking about in this King movement having progress in the level of change and what people are looking for now. I had listened to part of, full disclosure, I didn't listen to all of it. I listened to part of the podcast by Angela Rye, and she was asking the question, with this past election, is the Democratic ticket just too big? Is the tent too big, is what she said. We're trying to have, we want the black men in there to support the black women, but some black men and some black women ain't with that LGBTQ stuff, but we need the LGBTQ in there. And then we need the church folks, but then the church folks ain't with that. And then they ain't with the folks out with their pants down. And so we're trying to include everybody. And is the tent really too big to win? And she asked that. And so me thinking like me, deeper conversations, I think the question is not, is the tent too big? For me, the question was, is the responsibility of a beloved community, of a equitable community that is inclusive, is that idea too much of a responsibility for people who like to be led, for people who like to have just a king tell us what to do? And so I want to know what your thoughts are on sort of the monarch or the hierarchy of it all, of like, we like to have that one representative. If Obama's in there, then I don't have to do anything. Kamala's going to get in there and she's going to fix everything. Like, it's just democracy too much of a responsibility for us who just like to have the one?
I'll let you go, Pastor Tim.
Well, either one of y'all go ahead.
I'm like, wow. I think I would answer that a couple ways. I think that I would say that it is too much responsibility for any political party, right? So I think that there sometimes is a conflation of those that have responsibility for building a beloved community with any particular political party. And I think that is always going to be a failing endeavor. And so I think there's a problem there. To the idea of, those that want a king, I would say that I don't think the issue is whether or not the tent is too big. I would say that I don't think that the ideal at the heart of it is big enough, right? So that it becomes less about having a shared idea or vision that we're seeking, but instead an attempt to try to bring all these disparate groups together. And the only way that can happen is if there is a grand enough vision, and I hope we would want to do it positively. Pastor me every time I see, I can't help but think of Broadway, the many talents and things that she brings to bear in the pulpit and pastoral. And I have to admit that my beloved, my wife, has turned me into a wicked convert. Had me up late in the midnight hour, singing Defying Gravity and The Wizard and I, all those things. But, spoiler alert for a play that's been out for decades, the idea that they were gathering around a shared enemy is, I think, the same problem that we have even with the kind of parties we want to support, right? That we want to gather around this thing that we're against as opposed to what we're for. I say all the time in church, I am sick of being known as a believer as being a list of things that we can't do or we don't want to do or where we're against, but instead much more want a positive vision. And so I think that the difficulty is in naming and then getting the message of what that vision is, and having clarity on that. I think you start there and then the tent making begins.
Wow. Yeah. Yes, all of that. I don't know if the tent is too big. What I will say, and this is from a millennial perspective, what it has felt like, and I voted in 5 presidential elections, and the past 3 have felt very much like we are in a dumping ground. Like everybody who is not Trump is all in this, under this tent, instead of finding ways to foster relationships between that Black person over there who's anti-LGBTQ and that LGBTQ person over there. Instead of trying to bridge those gaps, I haven't felt like the party has made enough effort to actually foster relationship within itself. So it feels like we are a dumping ground for anybody who is anti that man. We all gonna gather here, but that is not a shared, that shouldn't be our shared thing, our shared identity. There should be something else underneath that, some sort of liberation mindedness, or something else needs to be underneath that. I'm reminded of a man that used to go to my church in North Carolina, a white journalist who I think he might be in his 80s now. He was sent down to Mississippi in the 60s and 70s to do journalist work. And he said it was so beautiful seeing poor white people and poor Black people coming together. The shared goal was that they both felt that they were victims of a system that was oppressing them, right? That their poverty actually brought them together. And they had a lot of good momentum down in Mississippi, down in the 60s and 70s. And so I'm thinking about that. And I'm thinking about how in my experience, it has felt like the Democratic Party has dropped the ball on fostering that shared identity beyond we're anti this one person.
I'm glad that you brought that up, because the Democratic organization comes to the churches during election season. And however people feel about that, they come to the churches, they talk to the people, and people decide, I like this personality, I don't like this one. This one's a God-fearing person. And King believed that faith was essential to creating a beloved community. Now, in today's polarized political climate, how can faith communities play a bigger role or a better role in bridging the divides between this democratic organization that isn't fostering relationships? And is it even allowed? Like, did anybody even ask?
I don't think anybody asked. But I guess I would say that I actually think part of the issue is, again, putting responsibility on an entity that can't hold it. So I actually think part of the answer is to decouple our hopes for beloved community from any partisan group, and to kind of recognize a political party for what it is, to name it as
Put on the
such,
t-shirt or
operated that way, and then we as faith communities do the work of building beloved community, which I think is a completely separate thing, to engage and to understand the political complex as part of a means towards it, to an end, but not the means towards an end. And to hold those two things separate, I think would allow for, because we have so much work to do as faith communities now to reclaim even the notion of what faith communities mean. I mean, it's interesting. I don't know that I have felt as much need to be evangelistic in a kind of public and political way as I have with this rise of Christian nationalism. I just want to reclaim what it means just to be faithful, just to be the church. And there's so many ideas about what that means. And this is the kind of language I don't know that I've used in years, but I just feel like the name of Jesus, right? The gospel is being so misrepresented that there is a huge responsibility to reclaim what it even means to be a faith community, particularly for us to be a gospel-based faith community in the public square, right? So there's work to me just in terms of representation of the message, and what comes right alongside that.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say something similar. So when we say faith, and I say faith in what? Faith in what? Because there's just so many people out there who are calling themselves people of faith. And I think, in order for the beloved community to come to fruition, the faith has to, again, be something that is bigger than us, right? So it can't be the type of Christianity that is preaching prosperity gospel for the individual. It can't be that, because that doesn't foster beloved community. And so we have to then go back to the drawing board and start to reclaim, redefine, reimagine what this faith thing is all about, if we want to see community come into being.
And I think the other thing I'd say too to that is that sometimes I wonder too if faith community's posture needs to be more background. And we sort of need to actively take a step back and recognize that there's some great work being done, honestly, towards the building of a beloved community outside of the spurring on and initiation of pastors or even religious leaders at all. And so what does it mean to reposition ourselves as support, as space, as resources, as opposed to trying to always get to the front? And I think that this is something that we saw to great effect in Ferguson, the way that some of the, let's say usual suspects, as it were, that hold particular banners, organizers and activists on the ground were like, no, we're not going to do that. And I actually think it was such an amazingly important, necessary move. And so I think even now that continues to be the case, that part of our work is to step back and say, how can we, Karmen, to your point earlier, how can we fight against the notions of the need for a king, right? Or even the need for like a Moses, right? For the prophet, the leader, as opposed to a community, right? A beloved community working towards, and how do we sort of step back to allow that to emerge and to be revealed?
Yeah.
Pastor Mill, I don't want to mess up the dates. I'll just say in a previous Instagram post, you talked about, I don't want to call it a rant, but I actually like that word. It was a rant.
I be ranting.
You were passionate about, and I loved it so much. I reposted it when you were saying, my call is enough. Like, I don't need to be the one. I don't need to be that one leader that everybody, and the kingdom needs everybody's hands. Can you just sort of elaborate a little bit more on that? I mean, I'm messing it up. I mean, you can paraphrase it, but just like the kingdom needs everyone.
Yeah, I don't remember what I said, but okay. No, I probably was, as I've been divesting from many spaces, right? So it was probably a rant connected to divesting from a lot of these conferencing spaces and these spaces that are everybody's kind of vying for attention in these places. And getting to a place where we know that my work is enough. My little slice over here, my little vineyard right here, I got to tend to this and try to make something happen here, or support, like as to what Pastor Tim is saying, support what is already happening, right? Instead of me being the leader. I'm okay with that. I think there are so many folks who are wanting to be the one. And I think we've been conditioned that way. I was going to say something about that. There's a lot of people out there who are like, I want to be the next MLK, right? I want to be Malcolm X. And their institutions condition them to be that way. And so... And so that is not my goal. My goal was to, whatever vineyard you have for me, I'm gonna just do this right now. That is not to say that I am not, thinking outside of the box or trying new things, but I think we focus a lot of attention on becoming. What is the word that I'm looking for? It'll come back to me. We focus a lot of attention on. What I will say is you are already doing the thing. And so this idea that we need to aspire to be something bigger or greater than we already are I think it's counterproductive.
I call that the ecclesiastical industrial complex. You need more members. You need to grow more. You need a bigger building. You need a bigger choir. Now you need a bigger, it's the industrial complex just of ecclesiastical thing. And I'm like, that is exhausting.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the social justice industrial complex, right? That like you said, Pastor Me, that Kingian idea of, and I think we've tied like success in, and I actually think a lot of it is well-meaning and good-hearted, right? But we've tied success in terms of building beloved community and activism and prophetic work to a certain kind of status. And I'm busy and I'm flying around and I'm doing all these things. And it really is a conflation, I think, or not a conflation, but a way that the notions of the prosperity gospel creep into even well-meaning, so-called justice-minded work, such that we are duplicating some of the same systems and institutions just in the face of justice, right? But it's the same ideas, like you said, Karmen, of more, the same ideas of biggest, grandest, most attention. And so I wanted to ask Pastor Me, if it's all right. I want to ask a question. I am so celebratory of the notions of divesting in certain ways, the way that you named,
Mhm.
and admire that work. And I wanted to ask, how do you feel like you're able to do that, right? What is it that allows you to have the kind of fortitude to be able to say, you know what, I'm not going to sort of follow that same route. I'm
Mhm.
not going to fall into those same traps. I'm going to go a different way.
Well, some of it is practical. So some of it's practical. Like I'm just like, oh, this costs too much money. I could be doing something in the community, right? Like some of it's very much like bottom line, like, oh, that conference cost me $2,000. We could have done this down the street and they need it more than that conference needs it. So some of it's practical. But I think because I'm second career, I have a different mindset about what this ministry thing is all about. I don't think this is my end all be all. I think that God has called me in this season to do this very specific thing. And I also think that there are times when that season ends and I'm okay whenever God says this is it for this iteration of ministry. I want you to do something else. I'm okay with that. And I think that because I'm second, third-ish career minister, I'm not afraid of the unknown. Whatever's coming, down the path, I'm not afraid of that. And so I have less interest in trying to be in all these spaces, to be known in all these places. My pastor in New York told me this once. He said, Mia, you can't build a church on the road. And I'm pretty much, I walked into almost, it feels like a church plant. And in a community that has several small churches, no big churches in Southwest DC. So we have a lot of work to do to reach the people because they're not coming to none of our small church. I mean, some of them are obviously, but comparatively to the numbers of who aren't coming. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done in this vineyard. It's like we're starting from scratch. We're planting seeds. We got to cultivate. We got to irrigate. We got to do so much. I cannot do that if I'm away. And I don't want to put forth a model, a hierarchical model where I am making other people do that while I'm away, shaking hands and rubbing elbows. That's not the model of ministry that I particularly want to push. But yeah, that's the beginning for me. I'm just really leaning into that recently.
I really appreciate that, and thank you for that. I mean, I'll be honest. I don't have some of the influences that you intimated to a couple of minutes ago, but as a cishet man in Black church spaces, I mean, I could just admit that pull for a certain kind of ministry and positioning is real. I mean, that is a temptation that is real, that particularly percolates in this king season, right? I mean, it is there, it's on, and so it is something I honestly have to actively fight against.
Yeah.
I can't wait for one of my dear brothers, Kyle Eugene Brooks, who is a professor out in San Diego. It's got an upcoming work that's talking about the haunting of former Black religious leadership, particularly King and others, the way that haunts our spaces today and haunts, those that are trying to, to perform and to live into a particular kind of ministry leadership. I can't wait until that work comes out because I think he puts his finger on really some of the stuff that we're naming here now and gives voice to it, because that's a major temptation, and not just a temptation to the individual, but I also would say it's a major hindrance to the work that we actually want to see do. I mean, I so often think about, if we take all this energy, all this learning, all this gifting, and if we collectively work together and care less about who had the most followers and who showed up at what and who got invited to preach where, and actually we're trying to do some work, that, I mean, I think we'd be further along, right?
Yeah.
So as big as the issues are, I think the gifts and talents are big too, but we are, we're doing our thing, trying to do our thing. So it's a struggle. It's a struggle.
Yeah. And I will say, I will add to that, when you say, I don't know Dr. Kyle's work that you just named, but the haunting of not just religious leadership, but political, right? Like the Dr. Martin Luther King, it haunts our political sphere as well. So I wanted to name that.
Yeah, I agree. And I look at that,
Absolutely.
even as you say, you can't, your mentor told you can't build a church on the road. I think that Dr. King's legacy, or I know it's been so Hollywood arranged and curated that we forget that he was preaching in places where people were like, don't nobody want to hear all of this stuff. So much that he gave that stirring speech about, I'm not a monkey in a zoo. I'm not here to entertain you. And you can put me out of places, but you can't stop me from preaching, because people didn't want to hear that. He was on the road preaching. He wasn't building a ministry at Ebenezer. That's what his father did. So people often want you to be all of these things that have been almost urban myth and not even really real. So, I mean, God bless y'all. I stick to my little digital ministry.
Well,
I don't know about the full congregation. That's not been
come
my
on, Reverend. You know about it, Reverend.
but, but yeah, I just think that that's part of the messiness. And if I can sort of switch gears here, I think that people sometimes look at a beloved community and says or thinks that it's going to be rainbows and lollipops and all of that stuff that people talk about. But talk about the messiness of community. And what comes to mind is even Paul in First Corinthians. Has Christ been divided? Y'all already fighting in it when we here. Talk about some of the messiness of the beloved community, or even trying to put it together.
Oh my goodness. I think I have to constantly remind myself that people are people, like humans are humans, and even at our best, it's going to be messy. And I'm so glad you said that, because it even helps me think about the way that I like preach certain things and think about certain biblical stories. So, for example, oft used is the miracle where Jesus took a little. I mean, how many times have I some in varied states of excitedness talked about how Jesus took a little bit of fish and a little bit of bread, and and I've heard some great interpretations of that it wasn't so much a multiplication in a supernatural kind of way, but a supernatural giving, and people kind of pulled out stuff. Regardless, I can't imagine with all those folk that it was like clean, right? That it was everybody was just like, yay, sure, amen. Or what are they doing down there? Where's my fish? Like,
I'll wait my turn.
No, I mean, I've been in crowds with people trying to eat at church fish fries and like the like, and
the buffet when the crab legs come out.
Fighting easy. And so I think part of our work is to lift up messiness even in the text, right? To say that this is a beautiful telling, but we know humans, and if we have any inkling that this happened in a real way, we got to know that it happened in messy ways. To know that, to name it, to accept it, and then to kind of push through it, and to aspire to more. But to name it, there's so much messiness in the text that is comforting to me, because ministry for me has always had seasons of oh, everybody's good, one accord, and we just had our watch night service a couple of days ago. Actually, it wasn't watch night because we did it early in the afternoon, but New Year's Eve service, and had these amazing testimonies, these young people, and I left feeling like, oh my God, this is what church should be, and it was amazing. But like, today is a couple of days later, and I spent half my day dealing with church mess. I mean, it's just what it is, right? And so naming it, embracing it, and then pushing past it is imperative.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. Community requires patience, and the Lord is still working on me. The Lord is still working on your girl. Community, to build this thing, to sustain it, it requires patience. People are going to get on your nerves. You're going to get on their nerves. I mean, and I think because there has been so much trauma in the church, and for a myriad of trauma. I just saw a video earlier where a pastor was making an unwed Black mother stand up in the church and apologize. There's so much trauma in the church. I don't know who that is.
They said trauma in the church. Let me knock on her door.
I don't know who that is. So much trauma in the church that people have been so quick to leave, right? And so when something a little disagreement or a little argument happens, when we are experiencing community, people are like, well, I ain't going back there, even though it's something that could be resolved with a little bit of patience and a little bit of grace. But it takes a lot. It takes a lot to hold it together and to lead by example, which is hard for me because I am not the most patient person.
I think that what we forget about the beloved community is just what you said, it's the local, it's the almost the cliche, it starts at home. There's messiness in the home. I'm the youngest of five. I have two older brothers, two sisters, and then I'm the fifth child in that order. And the last three of us, often joke the first two boys, if one's like acting right, don't expect the other one to show up today. And it never happens. If the second one shows up and we playing dominoes, yeah, the other one ain't coming. There's something on the wavelength that it doesn't happen at the same time. And we have, I think in the last 15 years, two family photos with all five of us because you can't get us all acting okay on the same day. And so that is the messiness of family, but we love our neighbors as ourselves. We give them because they're family. Oh, that's family. Oh, you know how he is. Or God knows their heart, how we say it to ourselves. We are practicing that there, but somehow it doesn't translate into the church. It doesn't translate into your everyday life, that this messiness is a part of. Yeah, I don't really know any trans people. So what is that? I don't know. And yes, you're going to be offended because I'm looking at you, but there's a way to have conversation, all of that. So I wanted to ask you, how in your communities, in your faith communities, church communities, own lives, are you able to maybe inject some of this um, space for messiness in building a beloved community?
I think for me, I always start with going back, right? And turning back to what's foundational, what's been foundational, and what has always existed. And it says in Jeremiah to seek the old ways, and then to go down the good paths, right? Which suggests to me that all the old ways aren't good, but that some of them are, right? And so that there are some ethics and things that existed. And to lean into them when you're faced with these new problems that can become even more challenging. Carmen's heard me tell the story before, but I remember it was about 4 or 5 years ago now on at sunrise service. We had a sister come out as trans at the service, like showed up at the sunrise service. This is like the Easter morning. This is the holiest of holy services.
You know who comes
Early
to
Sunday
sunrise.
morning. And I was excited. I was grateful. I'm crying. I'm like, this is amazing. But then I'm worried because I know folk, and I'm like, oh my goodness, what's gonna happen? My mother, who was with me, had to move away from sis because sis had on some real strong perfume, and she was so please, Tim, tell her I couldn't take the perfume. I had to move away. It's all good. So I'm like, all right, cool. Yeah, we made it into service. Saw a couple sisters over in the corner, kind of, talking and kind of looking. And I was like, oh, here we go. And so I got to come over here, Pastor. And I said, oh, here we go. I'm prepared. I'm on this spiritual high. And so I'm wondering, what's about to be said, what I'm going to have to do, what email I'm got to get ready for. And the two sisters, elder sisters in congregation said, what's her name? And I said, she's like, can we talk to her? I was like, well, of course we could talk to her. She's like, well, because we want to help her out because this is new to her. They were referring to how trans sis was dressed. Like this is new to her, and we want to help her out. We want to take her shopping. We want to try to help her out. And it reminded me of the way that as I grew up, I thought about the elders in church taking care of those that were growing up. Anybody who was growing up, they would pull somebody aside. I'm gonna teach you how to tie this tie. I'm gonna take you get your first suit. I'm gonna show you how to walk in high heels. And I'm admit it's a little problematic, right? I mean, there's some messiness even in like the naming and the way that it's stated. But I got enough sense to recognize the heart of what was at place, right? So recognize that what's at the heart of this is a deep care and affection for someone. And so if you can find that care and that ethic in the midst of the messiness and then nurture the message, please don't nurture the messiness, nurture the ethic and the care while whittling away at the messiness, then I think we can get more towards, actually realizing beloved community, in real time. Finding what's at the heart of it and then leaning into it.
Ask the question again, just to make sure I hit the points.
How can you sort of support or inject a space that people feel that like okay, this can be messy, and how can we work through it, or how can we deal with it?
Yeah. At my previous church, part of the covenant said something about, we were priesthood of believers, blah, blah, blah. And then it says something about open to disagreement or something. It was something like open to disagreement. It was a part of the church covenant. And I was like, that is interesting. But it really gave people permission to be like, you know what? I don't know if I agree with that in the deacons meeting or the whatever meeting we were having, right? Because it was a part of the covenant. And I think we have to give space for that in everything that we do. When somebody sends me an email after church, like that happened yesterday, when she said, I didn't like what you said, blah, blah, blah. And I have to be like, okay, well, let's talk more about what this is about. Let's talk more about this, what you thought was missing or whatever the thing is, right? As opposed to, well, I don't give a, which is what I might want to say.
I'm the pastor. What you talking about?
But I'm trying to lead by example. So let's talk about it. What would you have liked to hear in that moment, or whatever the thing is, right? So opening it up for conversation. Okay, well, we don't have to agree, but let's at least share a little bit about what's underneath. Also, a lot of times that messiness stuff is grief. I've learned this over the past couple of months. Some of what people have some of what's been coming out, like pre-election, post-election, is grief. And so when we actually take time to like sit down and have a conversation, I'm like, oh, you're grieving. We're grieving, or whoever's grieving, right? Whatever it is that we're grieving, the loss of your hope for a relationship, your divorce, you're grieving. Underneath so much of that is grief. I'm 80 years old and I did not get to live the life that I wanted to live. And so I might take that out on the 20-year-old who comes out in church or whatever the thing is, right? And so if we can give people permission to grieve, I think we might open up some of this messiness that happens in community.
I'm gonna put that on the t-shirt. Some of that's grief. Mm-hmm. that I'm gonna carry with me.
Yeah.
Because I think, one, I love the meme where the person says, I think I should get credit because I'm not as mean as I could be. First of all, let me say, as believers who are trying to lead people, I don't think that people get that we truly understand that if I slap you today and 4 other people saw me slap you, it's hard for me to minister to them again, because they are going to hear what I'm saying, but in the back of their mind be thinking, is this the day where he gonna slap me? And so you lose that connection and that ability to minister, so that we are always walking around checking, trying, practicing to not lose the ability to minister to people, as you say, lead by example. So first of all, I just want to give you credit because you didn't do what you could have did, especially after you worked on that Wicked sermon. Wicked the musical, not Wicked sermon.
All day long. Amen.
She had been talking about for weeks that I am going to do a sermon on Wicked. And I can't believe somebody said, I didn't like when you said.
Child, it's not even about the movie, it's about something else, but you know that happens.
Right. Happens. Yeah. So I'm going to thank y'all, but I wanted to ask one last question before we move on. And that is, Pastor AJ, you talked about reclaiming and almost being sort of evangelical. I know that in this climate of divisiveness and political turmoil, and the Democrats did this and they need to do this better, and the Republicans feeling like they have all of that stuff there. I know that systematically for historically, the Republicans have been the Christian, good, bad, or ugly, have been the Christian the arbiters of Christianity, I guess, when it comes to politics. And for many years, people are like, oh, the Democrats are so silent when it comes to that because, part of their base was like, don't bring that Christian stuff in here. Don't be trying to put that on me because of that type of Christianity. And I do know that the Democrats made some kind of attempt by hiring a hiring a minister or an ordained minister to be their sort of like voice and help them on the religious tip for this past cycle. I don't know how that worked. I'm not going to assume because I do know the person and I don't want to cast any aspersions on whatever work they might have done. But I will just say, in the separating, you talked about reclaiming this and like, maybe that doesn't belong. Right now, where we are, it's there. People are going to continue to put faith and politics together and the beloved community on this, like the leader needs to do this and this Democratic Party needs to do this. How do we operate now? If it is starting today and we need our political parties who are not trying to separate it, who are not trying to give it to the people and are who are fighting to be the one, how do we begin to, with the people, create a space that is a shared humanity and equity, that commonality that you talked about, not what we're against, but what we are here for? And how do we begin that?
Um, I think that I think so much of that work begins internally to the faith community. So when, as you describe it, the idea that the right has been the sort of Christian representative, that really gets boiled down to notions of quote unquote family values, and then like very, very essentialized to a couple of quote unquote hot button issues, whether it be LGBTQ 2+A rights or abortion. Um, and so I think reclaiming the narrative that, first of all, there are faith-based Christian ways to think about even those issues, right, in different ways, but also to broaden the scope to say that, all right, we're going to talk about faith and issues. Let's talk about all the issues. Let's talk about how healthcare, falls into this. Let's talk about how student loan forgiveness falls into this. Let's talk about how immigration falls into our faith and what the Bible says. I mean, this is one of the places where we don't even have to get cute in our interpretation and our hermeneutic with a lot of these issues. The Bible is, I mean, I always hesitate to say the Bible is clear about anything, but as it pertains to things like immigration and like, care and health and livelihood, I mean, I don't need to proof text. There's plenty there. So I think reclaiming that and broadening the scope of the conversation, being loud and proud, as it were, about faith. And so some might say that politically, I think over the years, Democrats might have done a great disservice by distancing from certain faith representations. And it seems like the only time, not the only time that sort of, but faith representations almost got limited to, well, we're gonna come to the black church, right? And then we'll come to the black church and the black pastor's gonna rile us up, right? They're gonna say something, they're gonna speak in that cadence and they're gonna get us going. But that's gonna be the faith thing. We're not gonna talk about the actual issues and what's going on and how we believe and understand this thing. So I think we have to reclaim it. And also, I think even in saying that, we have to continue to push our own communities, right? I mean, I could certainly speak for my own faith community. I have the gift of being able to share, and I certainly know, how Pastor Mia pastors, but there's still a lot of our congregations that are, haven't made some of those faith and justice connections. So, I mean, to be honest about the work that still needs to be done there. But I still think that the hope lies in preaching and proclaiming and being loud about it in the public square and not making that distance.
Yeah. You said something that made me think, some of us gonna have to start telling these politicians, no, you can't come. And I think I'm going somewhere with this slowly, but I think
Don't come.
they use us as their organizing power. They use us as their organizing power. That's always been the case, but now more than ever, they are hoping that by stopping by, that we will do their labor for them. I also think that, like, in every major city in America, there is some version of an interfaith network. I don't feel like either party is tapping into that. But since we're not expecting the Republicans to tap into that, but I don't think that the Democrats or the Green Party, whatever else, right, are tapping into that. And I think that that's where a lot of that interconnectedness is happening.
Hmm.
And by the time you get to something national, it's just a bunch of figureheads now talking to each other. But in every major city, you have your Washington Interfaith Network or some version of IAF or the other organizing company that goes around to cities and helps them organize themselves around faith. And I think that that's where the power is. That's how we build power. And so I think there's an opportunity there for our political leaders, national, local, and regional, state, and for our congregations to be always being reminded that the power is actually here and it's not up here. And if we can do a better job at organizing ourselves and actually participating when the Interfaith Network asks us to try to come and bring our congregations together, we might see a little bit more momentum happening as it relates to our political power as well. And also telling these people no, because if you really are speaking truth to power, they shouldn't want to come to your church on Sunday. Okay, I'm done. All right.
Oh, I'm supposed to come to the mic after that. Okay.
This is why I try to jump in first. So
May the Lord watch.
Get out the way. Get out the way.
No, thank you both for being here. Any final words? Yes, that you too, Pastor Mir. Any final words you want to share before we go?
I mean, I want to say thank you. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you for the opportunity to chop it up on this auspicious platform, and many love and wishes, and just that. I just want to name how, particularly in the last couple of years, this season has become such a place of lament for me. I find that around King Day, my primary emotion is lament. Lament for what's going on in the world, but a real lament over the way the King is remembered collectively and celebrated collectively, the kinds of things that we do to commemorate that really don't commemorate, the juxtaposition and the tension between wanting to have certain kind of platforms and popularity in a model of King, when the reality of King was that he died one of the most unpopular people in the country. So there's all these tensions and things. And so I just want to name that lament that I feel. And I think, I always feel like working through that lament is important. And that's juxtaposed also with, I just get personal for a second, with my youngest child's birthday is January 20th. And so she was born 1/20/2020. And so I remember my beloved was so kind and gracious enough. I was getting calls about President Trump's inauguration back in 2020 to put comments in the newspaper. And I was like, babe, can I step off, can I step out of the room to go answer it? And she looked at me, she said, you better. And and she told me what to say too. So, so it's a lot of the feelings and emotions in this moment for me personally. And I think that's true for a lot of folk too. So I think it's important, like Pastor Mia said, to work through all those things, even as we're fighting for the arc of the moral universe to bend back towards justice.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you for having us. And I'm always reminded on this day of Prathia Hall, and I try to remember that Dr. King did not come to being by himself, that there were communities of people, conversation partners, people cooking him food. Find your role in the struggle. Maybe your role is not protester. Maybe you are not going to be the person giving the speech. Maybe you were cooking some chicken in the cafeteria so we could eat after this is all over. Find your role, because it's a communal effort. I believe in communal salvation. So thank you for having us.
Well, I had this wonderful quote that I was going to talk about. Dr. King says, I choose love because hate is too big a burden. And that is what I lament, because every year 20 people post that online, and then I watch you hate the rest of the year. And it frustrates me. I'm like, we're a week away and you're already talking about somebody. But so I was going to talk about that, but I'm going to ask you, Pastor Mia, to recite something that you did in your Octavia Butler sermon. And that is, I know you remember this, when the young man comes to Octavia Butler and talks about, you are always talking about the problems and
Oh,
it's
yeah,
so
yeah,
depressing.
yeah,
Can you just tell us what she said in response?
She says, me pointing out the issues of the world is an act of hope. I'm paraphrasing, but me pointing out the issues of the world, the devastation, is actually an act of hope, that I actually have the audacity to believe that something else is possible. I'm paraphrasing there, but it's you can look it up, Octavia E. Butler, Essence Magazine 2000. They did a piece on her, and she talks about this young man in this lecture, and he was kind of like, but your stuff is scary, your books are scary, and you're doomsday. She goes, it's an act of hope to give you this information so that we can move forward.
And what does she say about there are 1,000 problems?
Oh, yes, yes, yes. There, I'm gonna have to look up the quote now, because I don't want to misquote
No, no.
the late great Butler.
But
I
he said
don't.
that
Yeah,
he had said to her that there are like all these problems, and what is the answer?
yeah. I don't have the answer. It's not about it's not about having the answer. It's pointing your attention to them so that we can hope for something else. Always leading she goes, one thing me and my characters never do is give up hope.
Yes.
Right? So even amidst all the problems, we are still hoping. Yeah.
And so I hope that that's what people carry this King holiday, is that there
Yeah.
is hope for the possibility of something else. There are 1,000 problems and 1,000 answers, and
Mhm.
you can be one of them.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah.
All right. Well,
Yes.
thank you, my guest, for joining me today. I
Thank you.
appreciate you so much and love you both immensely.